From New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Westin, and we're going to start today with a very special guest. She is Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, coming to us from the Capitol. Madam Speaker, thank you so much for joining us on a very busy week. You have a big package, spending package now, pending before the House after the Senate passed it, $484 billion. Do you have any doubt that the House will enact it this week? And do you need to do anything extraordinary, such as proxy voting, to get it done?
No, we will be able to, in a very strong bipartisan way, to pass the legislation as it passed in a bipartisan way in the Senate. It's nothing extraordinary about how we will vote, pretty standard fare, but we will take a recorded vote. In the Senate, they had unanimous consent, so they need a few senators to be there. We're 430 members now, and we'll need to have a quorum and a majority to get it passed, but we will.
An awful lot in this bill, something like $370 billion to replenish the PPP program, including through some smaller lenders, $75 billion for hospitals, another $25 billion for testing. What is not in the bill that you think still needs to be done?
Well, first let me just say how pleased I am with what is in the bill, and I thank you for the opportunity to do so. 2 weeks ago, the Secretary of Treasury called me and said he needed $250 billion in 48 hours. That would mean that by tomorrow, 2 weeks ago, the Republican leader went to the floor and said it's $250 for the program, and that's it. We're not making any other additions. We objected. The Democratic senators objected. We worked together for our proposal. They objected to that, made a counter proposal, which was resoundingly rejected by the Republicans. And for 1 week, they refused to negotiate until about last Thursday. Then they realized that they had no chance just to do the $250. There was so much more urgency. And in the bill, we of course support the $250. That was part of what we helped put together in the CARES Act. We support our small businesses, their entrepreneurial spirit, their optimism, their source of jobs and creation of wealth in our country. There was no question that we would be supporting that. But it took them a longer time than it should have to agree that we needed to make sure that even the smallest of small businesses would be included in that, and that we would be addressing our health needs because the key to our opening our economy, the key is testing, 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 and we got $25 billion, as you mentioned, and the $75 billion to our hospitals for all the purposes that serves. And so finally, they agreed to the package we put on the floor at the time. In fact, we even did more. In addition, that we can move on to the next phase if you wish now.
Does this take care of the rescue part as opposed to recovery? In the past, you've talked about rescue versus recovery, and talk specifically about state assistance to state and local governments. Do you regard that as part of a rescue or recovery, and what are the prospects of getting that done?
Well, I was placed in 3 phases. First, emergency, and that's what we did in the first few bills that we passed in March in a strong bipartisan way. We started with testing, testing, testing on March 5th. Here we are a month and a half later, and the administration has still not fully implemented it. After this bill, hopefully they will. So that was part of recovery. And then we went into mitigation, to mitigate for the damage to the economy with these initiatives to protect our small businesses, to provide more assistance in terms of health care and the rest. And now we have to go further into mitigation, unfortunately, to help state and local. Now, state and local means this. It means the healthcare worker, the police and fire, the first responders, the emergency services people, the teachers in our schools, the transportation workers who get vital, essential workers to work. Again, it's about the people. And these people are risking their lives to help save other lives, and now they're losing their jobs. So it's very essential that for our heroes, I call it our Heroes Act, that we have this assistance to state, county, local government, and to do so in a very significant way, to recognize the lost revenue that they have from lack of a stream of revenue because of the economy, and secondly, the outlays that they make in order to address the coronavirus tragedy.
So take us through, if you would,
again,
some of your thinking,
we're already
your strategy.
working on that bill. Sorry. Excuse me.
Well, that's what I'd like to talk about, is that bill. Take us through your strategy in agreeing to this approach, leaving out state and local. You did get, as you said, hospitals, you got testing in and protection for some of the smallest companies. But did you run the risk, perhaps, of not getting the state and local assistance, certainly anytime soon? Because now we have Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, saying he thinks he's maybe sort of done, he's cautious going forward. Even Stephen Mnuchin, your partner in negotiating a lot of this, is saying he's not sure we need a lot more. Are you concerned we won't be able to get the state and local anytime soon?
Well, first of all, let me remind you, this is the same Mitch McConnell who said on the floor of the Senate 2 Thursdays ago, there's no way we're going to do anything but the $250, and now we're up to $480 that the Democrats were able to add for smaller businesses and for the health and well-being of the American people. So that's an interesting statement, but it isn't the fact. This is an interim bill. We didn't expect to have an interim bill, except after the Secretary's call. So we went from CARES 1, and then we're going to go into CARES 2. And CARES 2 would have been about state and local. So we got everything we asked for on the floor of the Senate and more 2 weeks ago. They should have agreed then instead of holding it up to what they agreed to yesterday. But in terms of state and local, the president himself has even said, and he tweeted it out, I guess it was last night, that he's ready to do state and local, that he knows there has to be another bill. And there are other measures that are needed to be addressed in that legislation as well. It's going to be a major package. It's going to address, again, the needs of the states and localities, because that's where much of the healthcare delivery is, in public hospitals and the rest, as well as testing and that is in our bill that will be dispersed in some of it to many of the states out there, some of the money for testing, and also the lost revenue. This is a very important point. The lost revenue is something that we will have addressed in this next care package to recognize that piece of it, and that it has to be compensated for, and funds used, given to the states, can be used for that, because it is all coronavirus related, and everything we do is about coronavirus related. So it is with great optimism that we go forward with this. We're well down the path to do it. It was never intended to be an interim bill because we didn't know an interim bill would exist. But we used the interim bill to make the argument that this needed to be done as soon as possible, and it will.
As you say, it's all coronavirus related, which is terribly important. We obviously have a massive problem. Congress has already done a massive amount to try to address it. Are you concerned at all, and is there any way to protect against the possibility of politics entering into it? There were some reports that, for example, of the PPP, the first PPP that went out, that there was disproportionate amounts going to some states that, let's be frank, tend to vote Republican rather than Democrat. Can you do anything to make sure this is going to the places that need it the most, rather than for some political reason?
David, unfortunately, I think that our audio is not working. All I heard you say was, are you concerned at all? And so I don't know what the rest of it was. But I'm not a person who gets concerned. I see everything as an opportunity. And I see this as an opportunity for us to be able to meet the needs of the American people in a way that takes us forward to open up our economy very soon. The key to that is testing, testing, testing. The key to that is testing and contact tracing and isolation. We know how to get it done. And that the sooner we do that, science, science, science is the answer to opening up government. And I wish that everyone would share that view. There has been a reluctance on the part of this administration to respect science, knowledge, data, evidence, and that's information and fact is how you make decisions. And there has also been a reluctance to accept the role of government in this solution. If you reject science and you reject governance, then you can see why we're in the situation that we're in. That's exactly what the president did from the start. It's a hoax, reject science. It's magically disappear, reject science. It's we don't have to do anything about it because it's going to go away, reject governance. And that delay and that denial cause deaths. And my concern is that we are working together in a positive way to support the lives and the livelihoods of the American people.
Madam Speaker, I apologize for the technical problems.
But that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, well, it does largely, and it's great to have, but if I'll try to speak up a little more. It's a technical difficulties here. But the question I was asking is, this needs to go for coronavirus, and specifically for need. How do we make sure that these funds, massive funds, are not distributed with any political reason involved? Because with the PPP, there was some suggestion more funds were going to some of the states that tend to vote Republicans. Are you confident this is going where it needs to go rather than where it might be politically exigent to go?
Oh, of course not. But anyway, I think the public display of it, as Abraham Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish almost everything. Without it, practically nothing. And the idea that they would have distributed those funds in a way that was not in furtherance of ending this pandemic is totally irresponsible, but not surprising, because they have rejected science and governance, as I said. So again, we will have a bright light shining on this, whether it's the panel set up by the CARES Act for a panel of, in the Congress of the United States. I myself tomorrow will be introducing a select committee on oversight for the coronavirus, strictly about coronavirus, and how everything functions in the best possible way, nonpartisan, non-political, science-based as we go forward. But I might add to that I do think that it's not too soon, and should have been even earlier. We have to get ready for what comes next. How do we open up government? How do we do so in a way that does not contribute to a return of the virus? And if we have, God willing, a vaccine soon, how is that distributed? Not in a political way, but in a way that meets the needs of the American people. That would be sinful. But it is a challenge, and proper preparation prevents poor performance. That's what the Boy Scouts say. I wish the president would act like a Boy Scout in that regard and be thinking ahead, not just, and I'm prepared not to look back to some of his statements, but he cannot continue to misrepresent the facts to the American people and expect us to accept the deaths that go with that.
Okay, Madam Speaker, final question. Looking forward, the way you say we need to be doing seems exactly right. What do you look forward to in terms of an election in November? Do you have any sense of what that may look like, as you say, to make sure that people are safe, but they do get to express their views at the polls?
Well, I thank you for that. I don't think anything that we're doing now should have anything political about it. Every bill that we have passed has been strongly bipartisan, as 3 in March, and then this additional bill, and as we go forward, it'll be bipartisan as well. But one of the things that we want in the new bill is more funding to protect the integrity of our elections. As you saw, the Intelligence Committee, in a bipartisan way, released a report saying that without any question, the investigation into the Russian interference into our elections was substantiated, and it was nonpartisan, it was based on fact. The intelligence community tells us still the Russians are 24/7 trying to disrupt our election again. So we want to protect the integrity of our critical infrastructure of elections. We also want to be able to have people vote by mail. Especially at a time of concern about health issues, it's better for them to vote by mail, to get their ballot sent to them at home, to have same-day registration for those who do want to go to the polls, but to have the demand on poll watchers and the rest be much, much less. So we will be seeking additional funds. We had $400 million in the first CARES Act. We need much more than that now so that we can guarantee the integrity of our elections. So we're talking about the lives of the American people, the livelihood of our their livelihood and the strength of our economy, and the integrity of our elections, the life of our democracy. This is very, very important. Now, more than ever, more important to be able to vote by mail.
Madam Speaker, thank you so very much for your time today. That is Nancy Pelosi. She is Speaker
My
of the
pleasure,
House
David.
of Representatives.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Coming up on Balance of Power, we're going to talk about the present and the future for real estate with Jeff Blau. He's the CEO of Related Companies. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Westin. Well, all of us have been affected. All of businesses have been affected by this pandemic, and certainly real estate is included in that. We are now going to welcome the CEO of related companies, Jeff Blau, because that is one of the largest real estate companies in the country. It is the largest landlord in the United States, has over 3,000, largest landlord in New York City, and has over 3,000 employees. Welcome, Jeff. It's good to have you. Thank you for joining us. Start with where we are right now. I know earlier in April you were saying that basically it broke down between a commercial, retail, and residential in terms of how people are paying their rent, with commercial and residential doing very, very well, but not so much retail. Is that changed?
Well, thanks for having me, David. So that basically still holds true. It's mid-month now, so as we approach May 1st, all the retail professionals and landlords are wondering, again, what's going to happen with rent payments. I still believe residential and commercial office will stay strong. Retail is obviously the weaker point, and hotels, unfortunately, aren't collecting any revenues at the moment. So we're all planning for that reopening and what it looks like. We're working kind of with our office building professionals as to what is the office building, what is going back to work look like, what is your office going to look like, how are we going to go back, how many people are going to be in the office, what are the protocols for testing, for masks, for touching the elevator buttons, for signing into a building. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about that across all the asset classes. What does it mean to stay in a hotel? Unfortunately, I think people will go back to their office much sooner than they start traveling, and so I think you'll see a delay on the hotel side as to when that comes back online. So I think it is different for each of the asset classes, and obviously the longer this goes on, the greater the impact on each one of those components.
So Jeff, give us a specific concrete example. Hudson Yards, really big, exciting project that you just opened recently. You've got retail in there, you've got commercial in there, you've got residential in there. What sorts of differences are you contemplating for the way you configure? For example, the various businesses that are in there. Some very prominent businesses, law firms are in there. How will it look different if I go to work at Hudson Yards?
So we are establishing protocols in the office building. So as you enter the building, we will be doing temperature checks, and whether we do those with thermal scanners or the more conventional ones where it's just on your forehead, that remains to be seen based on the quality of those thermal scanners that exist out there today. All the employees in the buildings will be wearing masks and gloves, and there will be procedures for how many people come into the lobbies at the same time. One of the things that we're working with our tenants right now are doing staggered shifts. So we expect to be able to have that flow through the lobby decrease substantially based on start times. The other thing we're hearing from our tenants is that they're not going to bring everyone back all at the same time. Almost like, if you remember, how we closed down. First it was 50% of your workers had to stay home, 25% of your workers. I think my guess is that that's going to happen in reverse. And so you will see a slow build up to occupancy again. And then the big one is testing, right? And we just don't know the availability and the efficacy of the testing yet, and whether that becomes part of entering a building's new protocol or not.
So in the meantime, it must be affecting your revenue as well as your cost line. How does that work through when people cannot pay their rent, either will not or cannot pay their rent? What kind of pressure does that put on you? And ultimately, what kind of pressure does it put on the entire financing structure for real estate developers?
This is one of the real biggest concerns I see for the commercial real estate sector. Whether it's retail or hotel or slightly less on residential, to the extent that landlords are not able to collect rent from tenants, the landlords use those rents to pay their own building employees, property taxes to state and municipalities, and ultimately debt service to the banks. And once that ecosystem of rent to expenses to interest to the banks gets broken at one part of the chain, ultimately that's going to become a problem at the banks. And we haven't yet really seen the impact on kind of commercial mortgages that I think this will start to occur specifically on retail and hotel assets. I think that you will see a wave of defaults on commercial and hotel loans, and that hasn't worked its way through the system. You know, in the short term, the banks have been attempting to solve the liquidity problem with forbearance agreements, whether it's 60 or 90-day waivers, but that quickly will become credit problems as those assets become less valuable and unable to service the debt after the forbearance period. And so I do think we are soon to come into that problem in the commercial lending markets. And you know, further
Jeff,
than that, in the CMBS markets, it's even more difficult because at least with the banks that are holding balance sheet loans, there's someone on the other side of the table to talk to. In the CMBS market, many people have moved their loans into special servicing, and it's a much slower process to be able to even allow for forbearance agreements to get done. So it's going to be difficult, and that's just for existing loans. The question of when does the commercial lending market reopen for new lending is a whole other issue, and that's going to require time and kind of back to work and things to come back online before that really starts to happen.
And Jeff, going out past 60, 90 days, even 6 months into the longer term as you look at it, are you contemplating the possibility of differences, such as people may not need as much commercial real estate because they're doing more things from home, working from home, things like that? Or more specifically, in New York City, there are reports that people may not be as enthusiastic, can I put it that, of working and living in New York City. Do you think it could change longer term your business?
So in the commercial office space, I actually think I have a contrary view on that. I think what people realize, even with all the Zoom calls and WebEx and Google Hangouts, it's really not an effective work-at-home tool. I think if we actually have done surveys of our own employees and our tenants, and people are itching to get back to work. The work-at-home has not been particularly effective, and I think people want to go back to the office. What I do think you'll see a maybe long-lasting change is on the travel side. So if you have a meeting, do you really need to do that trip to Chicago to have that meeting in person, or could you use Zoom or WebEx or one of those tools to avoid that trip? And ultimately, that will have long-term impacts on the airlines and the hotel sectors. So I do see some big trends. Interestingly, you mentioned about
Jeff?
Less office space.
Jeff?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I'm going to interrupt you. I apologize because I don't want to let you go without talking about related companies, because it is a corporate citizen of New York City, a big corporate citizen. To give us a sense of what you're doing to help the situation in the meantime.
We in times like this, we think it's important for all companies that are able to help really do that. And so when our construction teams were shut down, and the governor announced that potentially we would need 140,000 beds, we jumped into action to rebuild in a closed hospital on First Avenue, and we're able to put online 400 beds in about 10 days in the event that it was ultimately needed. I think that has backed off a little bit, and maybe we won't need any more. The other thing that we're doing that's really been very helpful, we partnered with World Central Kitchen and Jose Andres to set up a food kitchen across from Javits at Hudson Yards, where we're providing free food for Javits Center's health workers and medical workers. And it's really been a great initiative, and I've been volunteering there quite a bit.
Jeff, thank you so much for that. Jeff Blau, CEO of Related Companies, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Westin. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you very much. President Trump has a warning for Iran. He's told the Navy to destroy Iranian gunboats that harass American ships at sea. Last week, 11 gunboats from Iran's Revolutionary Guard crossed the bows and sterns of American warships at close range. Federal health officials are confirming that the coronavirus killed 2 people in California in February. That suggests the illness was circulating in the United States weeks earlier than was originally thought. Officials say 2 people who died in Santa Clara County in February on the 6th and 17th. At that time, there were only 11 known cases of the virus in the United States. President Trump says the U.S. will begin reopening national parks amid the coronavirus outbreak. Speaking at an Earth Day event at the White House today, Mr. Trump said, quote, "You have a lot of land to open up." The president didn't say exactly when the parks would start to reopen. In the UK, 759 people died from the coronavirus in the past 24 hours. That's down from the day before. The country's preparing to start human trials for a vaccine of the disease. Government officials say they are increasingly confident the country has passed a peak in cases and deaths, but continue to warn of the possibility of a second peak. The UK has more than 134,000 confirmed cases. More than 18,000 people have died. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thank you so much, Mark. Well, Michigan is one of the states that's been hit the hardest by the coronavirus. We're joined now by the Lieutenant Governor, and he is Garlin Gilchrist. So, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for joining us. Give us a sense of where the virus is right now in Michigan. How bad is it? Are you still on the rise in terms of number of cases? And I'm sorry to say deaths.
Well, thanks to the important actions that Governor Gretchen Whitmer and I have taken, and that people have worked to stay home and stay safe, we haven't been able to, we believe, see our curve plateau as far as how the virus is spreading in communities across the state, and even the hardest hit parts of our state, like the city of Detroit and its surrounding metropolitan area. So we believe that we're trending in the right direction, and we certainly are going to continue to be mindful and make policy decisions to continue to maximize public safety and maximize the reduction of this virus in our communities.
I'm glad you raised the issue of Detroit and the surrounding counties like Oakland and things like that. Is Michigan right now, in terms of coronavirus, a tale of 2 states? That is to say, is it very different in the rest of the state than it is in Detroit and the immediately surrounding counties?
Well, it's very difficult to say that definitively because we are still working very hard to ramp up our testing capacity across the state. But yes, it has been shown that southeastern Michigan, where Detroit, Oakland, and Macomb counties are, have seen the highest number of confirmed cases and the highest deaths. And this has even visited me personally. I've lost 16 people in my life to COVID-19. So this is real for people, but we all know that we need to work together. This is everybody versus COVID-19 here in the state of Michigan. And so by keeping one another safe, by staying home, by practicing social distancing, we've issued orders to make sure that people are doing that in Michigan, and we believe that that is bearing fruit.
And I'm sorry for the loss of people in your life. We shouldn't just run over that. That's a big issue. Give us a sense of the extent to which you believe this may be because Detroit has a very large African-American population. I think 75% of your population, something like that. And there are indications that African-Americans are being hit harder by this disease than others.
Well, the state of Michigan was one of the first and remains one of the few states in the country to report out its coronavirus test results and deaths along racial and ethnic lines. And we chose to do that because we know that there have been health disparities in our communities for generations that have led to poor health outcomes. And so once we noticed and observed this trend here with the coronavirus, we decided to step up and take action. And Michigan became a leader by establishing our Michigan Coronavirus Task Force on Racial Disparities, of which I am the chair. And we want to address several things. The fact that there are environmental factors that contribute to increased rate of infection, whether it's things like low air quality, but also the fact that so many people who are working on the front lines, our nurses and nurse assistants, our bus drivers, people at the grocery store, people who are working for utility companies, our first responders, they're more likely to be low-income Black people and people of color, and they are more exposed to this virus because of the nature of their jobs, and they're still working. So we're working to put interventions on the ground right now to help decrease their risk of infection, increase their ability to isolate, and so that we can stop the spread of the virus in the community. And that, we believe, will help to decrease the mortality rate amongst Black people. Black people make up 14% of the population in the state of Michigan as a whole, but we have made up 40% of the deaths in the state of Michigan. So it's important that we act and act now.
Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, this is first and foremost obviously about the health and the safety of citizens. There's also some economics involved. The city of Detroit is just coming out of a bankruptcy, just getting back on its feet. What kind of financial pressure is this putting on Detroit?
It's putting tremendous financial pressure on all of our cities and all of our states. The human services costs alone are going to be a big hit on budgets across the nation, and that is why we continue to advocate fiercely for more resources for state and local governments from the federal government, because we have to balance our budgets and they don't. And we need to make sure that money is not being put in front of people's survival right now. And so we're working hard to unlock the resources that we can at the state level to support individuals and families and small businesses, importantly. But we're going to need a lot more help from the Fed to make that happen. But I know this. Detroit's a resilient city. I came back here home in 2014. And I've seen just the amazing beauty, not just the potential, but the reality of how much hard work and creativity exists in this city. We can get through this by working together. The state of Michigan will get through this by working together.
Yeah, for those of us who've known Detroit over the years, it's come back a long way. It's quite dramatic. At the same time, the report, there's a report on Bloomberg actually just today, that you're going to be short something like $358 million that you have to come up with in the next 16 months, or the state will take over the city. What are the prospects of that?
Well, again, the financial hit that's coming from this pandemic is something that is, for real, is unprecedented. And so we are working to plan for all these scenarios. But what's important to note is that, again, relief from this will need to come from the federal government to make sure that state and local governments have what they need. We have a big hole in our state budget because of this. We're going to have a big hole in city budgets across the state in communities large and small. So we don't have the answer on any of these questions yet because we frankly don't know how large the hole is going to be. But we're working hard to prepare for these worst case scenarios. And right now, the best way to do that is to advocate for the federal government through our congressional delegation and to the Trump administration directly to make sure that we get the resources that we need so our communities can get through this.
We're starting to see some states begin to experiment with opening the economy back up. Certainly Georgia has said they're going to open some things up as soon as this Friday. We even had in New York our Governor Cuomo say that maybe elective surgery is possible in the upstate part, away from New York City. Is that possible? Are you starting to look at that for Michigan, given the fact that there may be a different situation in the southeast of the state as opposed to the rest of the state? Goodness knows, Upper Peninsula is a different world.
Well, first and foremost, people are going to drive our decisions, people's public health and public safety, because our economy can't come back without people being confident that they will be safe when they leave their homes. And in order to establish that, we really need three things in place. One is massively ramped up testing in every part of the state. We cannot understand community spread until we can test enough people, including people without symptoms. We've done a lot of work to make more testing available in the state of Michigan, but we need more from the federal government as well as we're trying to procure it from private sector sources across the country and across the world. The second thing we need is the ability to make sure that we can do contact tracing so that once people have tested positive, that we're able to find out who they may have potentially exposed so those people can get tested. And then the third piece is enabling people to isolate so that we can safely contain the spread of the virus. We need to make sure those three things are in place across the state before any region can think about coming back. And we're working on plans to establish that in Michigan right now. So we're going to be releasing some more details on that in the coming days. But those are the principles that we're going to need to follow so that we can open up responsibly and not cause a second wave.
Lieutenant Governor, we just talked with Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and she's confident that this $484 billion spending package will pass, which includes $25 billion for testing. Have you had a chance to look at that? Will that go a long way toward dealing with some of your need for testing?
I mean, every resource that's going to contribute to getting more tests in the state of Michigan and across the country is helpful to us to understand and respond to this virus, so I appreciate that. I know that we're going to continue to need more resources from the federal government for testing components, as well as for things like the Paycheck Protection Program, which I helped to launch here in the state of Michigan to support our small businesses. That ran out of money. Michigan business got about $10 billion, but that's nowhere near covering all the small businesses in our state. state that need the support. So we're going to continue to work with our congressional delegation to advocate for more in future coronavirus relief packages, but we appreciate any dollars coming into the state of Michigan.
Okay, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, thank you so very much for your time today. That's Garlin Gilchrist. He is the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Michigan. Coming up here on Balance of Power, we're going to talk with Tina Smith, Senator from Minnesota, about this new spending bill and what more is needed for her home state of Minnesota. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. The House is about to enact $484 billion in more spending to try to cushion us from the coronavirus. But many people think more yet is needed. We're going to welcome now Senator Tina Smith from the state of Minnesota. So welcome, Senator. It's good to have you here. What will this $484 billion do for Minnesotans?
Well, thank you, David. It's great to be with you, too. And I'm happy to talk about what we passed yesterday in the Senate and looks like is on its way to becoming law in the next day or so. It will provide a couple of things that are really important to Minnesota and really the rest of the country. The first is that it replenishes this small business loan fund that is getting help to small businesses. And I want to note that we made some important additions to what was originally proposed in the Senate by Senator McConnell, because we wanted to make sure that these small business forgivable loan resources are really getting down to those small businesses, the hair salon on Main Street and the family daycare provider who is really struggling to keep it all together right now. Those small businesses did not get a lot of the money in the first tranche of this Paycheck Protection Program, and we want to fix that. So to me, that's a really important part of the proposal that we passed yesterday. We probably are going to need to do more, but this will be really important to Minnesota businesses.
What about assistance to state government, local government? That did not make it into this package. A lot of people think that that is needed. Is it needed in Minnesota?
It is going to be extremely urgently needed in Minnesota. You know, we also in the bill that we passed yesterday in the Senate included help to hospitals, and that will be important. But we wanted to get done help to state and local governments that are really bearing the brunt of this. And think about what that means. You know, these are state and local governments that can't deficit spend. They can't spend money that they don't have in the bank account. And I know this because I used to help run the city of Minneapolis in the state of Minnesota. And they are providing essential public services, police and fire, and the counties are doing all the work to try to find shelter for people who are experiencing homelessness. And these are services that we can't go without, and that is why the federal government needs to step in. And it's encouraging. I want to just say it is encouraging that though we didn't get this done in the package we voted on yesterday, there were signals from the president and the administration that they intend to move with the Democrats on that, and that is really makes me feel better.
We just talked with the Lieutenant Governor of Michigan, and Michigan has been particularly hard hit. I think it's the fourth hardest hit in the union. Every state has been hit, but Minnesota not nearly as much yet, at least, as Michigan. What do you think accounts for that?
Well, we are experiencing, a lot of worry in Minnesota, and we've had, we still are seeing our case rates going up. But I really think it points to what we are doing well in Minnesota. Our governor has been very aggressive about early putting shelter-in-place orders. I think that Minnesotans are generally following those orders really well, and that is helping us to be responsive. We are also seeing that though we have cases in the hospital, we're managing those people so that they're not in the hospital as long as we were fearful that they would be. And so while every single person that we've lost in Minnesota around the country, that's somebody's loved one, and it is a tragedy. We are grateful that we are not seeing the increase as quickly as we're seeing in other parts of the country. But, even as I say that, we are looking at an outbreak down in Nobles County in Minnesota. So Nobles County is right on the Iowa border. It's right by Worthington. It's in Worthington, Minnesota, is in Nobles County, where we have a large meat packing plant facility, and we have now over 100 cases in Nobles County. And this is just an example of how nobody is immune from this. And we have to be doubly careful, even in pretty rural and agricultural counties like Nobles County.
It certainly is clear we can't let our guard down even for a second. At the same time, there is now talk, some consideration about starting to open up the economy somewhat. Georgia certainly is going to move on Friday. Even here in New York, Governor Cuomo said maybe we can have elective surgeries, at least upstate, away from New York City. Is it too soon for Minnesota to think about whether it might be able to open and back up part of its economy?
Well, I think a lot about what Dr. Fauci has said, which I think is for sure right, which is that this isn't going to be like a light switch, right, that flips on suddenly and everybody goes back to normal. It's hard to imagine what a new normal is going to look like. You know, in Minnesota, our governor in the last week or so has loosened some of the restrictions around outdoor activities like golf and fishing and putting docks in the water. And that makes sense because it doesn't require a lot of people being all close together. But I've got to say, I really worry about this idea that we can just go back to normal. And, we can't think about that really until we get on top of what we need to do with testing. And I just was listening to the Lieutenant Governor from Michigan talking about this adequate testing, also including the antibody tests that we need so we can see, okay, who's been infected and what can we learn about whether they've developed immunity to the COVID-19 virus, and what can we do around contact tracing. These are all things where, frankly, the federal government and the Trump administration has fallen down on the job, and we addressed some of that, I should say, in the bill that we passed yesterday, right?
Right. Yeah, a lot of work left to be done. I hope that some of that will go toward that testing phenomenon. Thank you so much. That's Senator Tina Smith, the Democrat from Minnesota. Coming up on Balance of Power, we're going to have more with my interview with Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Westin. Earlier this hour, I had to speak with Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. And one of the things I asked her was, is she sure that they're going to be able to pass in the House that $484 billion bill that's come out of the Senate?
No, we will be able to, in a very strong bipartisan way, to pass the legislation as it passed in a bipartisan way in the Senate. It's nothing extraordinary about how we will vote. Pretty standard fare, but we will take a recorded vote. In the Senate, they had unanimous consent, so they need a few senators to be there. We're 430 members now, and we'll need to have a quorum and a majority to get it passed, but we will.
An awful lot in this bill, something like $370 billion to replenish the PPP program, including through some smaller lenders, $75 billion for hospitals, another $25 billion for testing. What is not in the bill that you think still needs to be done?
Well, first let me just say how pleased I am with what is in the bill, and I thank you for the opportunity to do so. 2 weeks ago, the Secretary of Treasury called me and said he needed $250 billion in 48 hours. That would mean that by tomorrow, 2 weeks ago, the Republican leader went to the floor and said it's $250 for the program, and that's it. We're not making any other additions. We objected. The Democratic senators objected. We worked together for our proposal. They objected to that, made a counter proposal, which was resoundingly rejected by the Republicans. And for 1 week, they refused to negotiate until about last Thursday. Then they realized that they had no chance just to do the $250. There was so much more urgency. And in the bill, we of course support the $250. That was part of what we helped put together in the CARES Act. We support our small businesses, their entrepreneurial spirit, their optimism, their source of jobs and creation of wealth in our country. There was no question that we would be supporting that. But it took them a longer time than it should have to agree that we needed to make sure that even the smallest of small businesses would be included in that, and that we would be addressing our health needs because the key to our opening our economy, the key is testing, 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 and we got $25 billion, as you mentioned, and the $75 billion to our hospitals for all the purposes that serves. And so finally, they agreed to the package we put on the floor at the time. In fact, we even did more. In addition, that we can move on to the next phase if you wish now.
Does this take care of the rescue part as opposed to recovery? In the past, you've talked about rescue versus recovery, and talk specifically about state assistance to state and local governments. Do you regard that as part of a rescue or recovery, and what are the prospects of getting that done?
Well, I was placed in 3 phases. First, emergency, and that's what we did in the first few bills that we passed in March in a strong bipartisan way. We started with testing on March 5th. Here we are a month and a half later, and the administration has still not fully implemented it. After this bill, hopefully they will. So that was part of recovery. And then we went into mitigation, to mitigate for the damage to the economy with these initiatives to protect our small businesses, to provide more assistance in terms of health care and the rest. And now we have to go further into mitigation, unfortunately, to help state and local. Now, state and local means this. It means the healthcare worker, the police and fire, the first responders, the emergency services people, the teachers in our schools, the transportation workers who get vital, essential workers to work. Again, it's about the people. And these people are risking their lives to help save other lives, and now they're losing their jobs. So it's very essential that for our heroes, I call it our Heroes Act, that we have this assistance to state, county, local government, and to do so in a very significant way, to recognize the lost revenue that they have from lack of a stream of revenue because of the economy, and secondly, the outlays that they make in order to address the coronavirus.
That was Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi speaking earlier on Balance of Power. Coming up next, we'll have a second hour of Balance of Power over on Bloomberg Radio, and there we will speak with Representative French Hill, Republican of Arkansas. He's been designated as part of the panel that's to oversee the nearly $3 trillion now that's being spent by the U.S. government to try to shore up the economy. That's coming up on Balance of Power. I'm David Westin, and this is Bloomberg.